First, thank you all for joining us today. This is the Cape Cod Maritime Museum's Fall 2022 lecture series, our last lecture of the fall, even though it kind of feels more like winter now. So welcome, we're very happy to have you with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with today's speaker. If you should have any technical issues, please use the chat. That's the little one of the little icons on your toolbar, and you can type in what your technical issue is, and Elizabeth York, our lovely executive director who's behind the scenes, as always making the technical magic happen, Liz will be happy to chat back to you and tell you how to resolve whatever issue you might be having. You can also type any questions you would like into the chat for our speaker. She'll be answering all the questions at the end, but you can type them into the chat at any time during the talk. So please feel free to do so. Alrighty, and we're very happy that today's lecture is being given by one of our very own, that is Meghan Reilly, the Youth Programs Director at the museum. She is a recent graduate of Mass Maritime Academy, where she majored in marine science, safety, and environmental protection. I had to practice to get all this.
It's a long one. It's a real long one.
And of course, she minored in marine biology. So thank you so much, Meghan. You're going to introduce us to 13 of your very favorite sea creatures.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen with you guys in just a second. Okay. All right, can everyone see this?
Yes, looks good.
Wonderful. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Meghan Reilly, and like Mary said, I'm the Youth Program Director at the Cape Cod Maritime Museum. Today, we're going to be talking about some really interesting sea creatures. Everything that I talk about today can be found on the East Coast, can be found on Cape Cod. Not everything that I do talk about today is native, so I will be talking about a few invasive species throughout the kind of interesting little friends that we have. But all of them can be found on Cape Cod along the East Coast, in the Bay, in the Sound. It may not be super close to shore, and it may not be super abundant, but they are there. If you have any questions, we'll save them to the end, and we'll dive right in. And so the first really cool little creature we're going to talk about is the dog whelk, or the dog winkle. I'm not super well versed in Latin, so I will let you guys decide on those Latin pronunciations. But also known as the dog winkle, it is a small gastropod, so it is a tiny little snail that we have here on Cape, similar to a periwinkle, but different shell shape, and they do tend to look a little different. They love the rocky shores where they can find barnacles and mussels, but they tend to stick to those rocky shores. You're not going to really find them on those sandy bottoms, and you're not going to find them in mussel beds or oyster beds. So mussels have these little things called byssal hairs, which they use to kind of cement themselves to the ground, to any substrate, rocks, docks, things like that. And that can get tangled within these tiny little dog winkles. So they really kind of stay away from those mussel beds, but those rocky shores are really where they call them their home. They tend to stay closer to low tide area with high wave action. They haven't really migrated further up the shore, but they do have adaptations in their shell shape to be a little bit hydrodynamic, and a stronger foot structure that they use to kind of move around, to kind of hold on to things a bit stronger. They are small. And about 30% of the dog whelks will pass away in those mussel beds that I did talk about. They have a conical shaped shell, which you can see in the next picture here. It's more of an elongated shell. It's different than what you'll see in a periwinkle or in another classic marine snail. But they're smaller, they're smoother, and they are more rounded than an oyster drill or a nettled whelk. And nettled whelks are similar size, but they have a bit more pointy shells. These guys can be found all along our coast, can actually also be found along the coast in England and Europe. But how they feed, which is why that top picture up there. So those tiny little holes are actually drill holes from these little guys. And what they'll do is they'll drill a hole. They have what's known as like an oyster drill, similar to a moon snail. They will drill a tiny hole and they will inject an enzyme inside the shell. And what that enzyme will do is it'll break everything down and turn it into a liquid soup. And then through their siphon or their proboscis, they'll actually suck that entire liquid soup out through that one hole. And so they don't have the ability to crack open shells, so they're drilling through, they're digesting and completely dissolving what's on the inside of that shell. This process isn't an immediate process. It can actually take up to several days to just get through the shell, and then another several days to completely liquefy what's in the shell. So in total, it's probably about a week that they're eating one shell or one organism. So it does take a few days for this to happen. But they're a little pretty little snail that we have on Cape. Our next interesting sea creature that we have is, not many people know that we have these up here, especially this far north, but we do have an orange-footed sea cucumber. So sea cucumbers they almost look like a football shape, these guys. We have the largest one here in New England, and it's the most abundant. So this is the one you're going to be finding most out around Cape Cod Bay. They like, again, those rocky shores, but they like to be in those crevices where not too much is going on. They're not being disturbed. They can range in length. They're typically about 8 inches long, and they have these 10 branching tentacles right around the mouth. So that's that balloon that you're seeing on one end. So those are the tentacles. And so they use that to feed, and they have these tube feet that they'll push food to those tentacles, and then that'll be brought into its mouth. Unlike most sea cucumbers, which are deposit feeders, so they will eat what's on the ocean floor, they'll kind of scavenge around. Orange-footed sea cucumbers are suspension feeders. So things that are floating in the water column around them, they will use those tentacles to grab. It's not necessarily stinging. They're just kind of there to grab and hold on to things that are floating in and around itself in the water column. They are typically a orange, yellowish, brown color. They're not super beautiful like the ones that you would see in Bermuda or the Caribbean. They're also not poisonous. And they do move. So this tube feet does allow them to move. They're not fast moving. They're not swimming. They kind of wiggle around. If they are threatened, they will actually suck up water to elongate themselves and then kind of wriggle to move around and become a less easy prey instead of just sitting on the ground. But that orange part of those tentacles that they use to move food right into your mouth, you can kind of see the little tube feet. They almost look like a weird little caterpillar moving around. So they use those tube feet to move. They use those tube feet to get food to their mouths, and they just kind of hang out and eat and digest. They can live for a while. Not too much is known about how long they exactly live, but they're very leathery and they're very stiff. A lot of people think sea cucumbers are actually squishy, but they're more of a stiff, firm animal. The next sea creature we're going to be talking about is the northern pufferfish. We had one at the museum in our 2 fish tanks that we had for a while. His name was Paul. He was about the size of the bottom picture, so he was less than an inch. He was a juvenile northern pufferfish. These pufferfish are not poisonous like many of their other relatives. They are not poisonous. They do have tiny spines, but it almost feels bumpy than spiny. They live most of their lives on the bottom and channel margins. They really like protected waters where not too much is going on. So you're not really going to find them at a beach, but you may find them, just on the outskirts of where the calmer water is. And they can range anywhere from 3 feet to 180 feet deep in water depths. They have a small beak. If you look at the front, it almost looks like a parrotfish beak. It's a tough, hard, shell-crushing beak that used to crack open mollusks, crustaceans, and other invertebrates. So that's what they're using to break that open. They have a very blunt body shape, so they're not very they're hydrodynamic, and they are not great swimmers either. They don't move their fins like a normal fish would. They actually kind of wobble in a sense, so they're very clumsy swimmers. So that those 2 fins on the back the two ventral fins, what they do is they kind of wiggle them a bit, and that's what they use to move. And then their anal fin is really just used as a rudder to kind of steer where they're going. So that almost looks like they're wobbling through the water. They're very much shaped like a football, so very blunt body shape. And they range all the way from Cape Cod all the way down to northeastern Florida in those shallow to deep waters. And their spawning occurs May and August, but we don't know exactly how long they're living, what they're doing, main causes. Not many studies have been done on their lifespan, but they will lay sticky eggs, like a clutch of eggs that will actually be stuck to the bottom, and they are very territorial. So the males will stay and guard that clutch of eggs until it hatches, which can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. But that male pufferfish will wait until all the eggs have hatched, or until most of the eggs have hatched, well, then they will leave. They actually will puff up if they are threatened, if they come when they're pulled out of the water. So if they're pulled out of the water, they're inhaling air, but that doesn't go into a lung and it doesn't go into their stomach. They actually have a special chamber specifically for the inflation process that they have, where they'll inhale water or they'll inhale air, and they will puff themselves up. They will float upside down until they deflate, and they will swim away. It does not harm them. I mean, it is very stressful for the fish, but it's not going to hurt them in any way. They were designed to do this. It's a defense mechanism for them. So it does not hurt them in any way. And they are not poisonous, like I had said. So they don't have spines like many of the common pufferfish that people think of. It's more of almost like a ball texture, like the dodgeball texture, that red dodgeball. That's kind of what it feels like. They also have really interesting eyes, which is, I think, my favorite part about pufferfish. Their eyes almost look like a galaxy. So if you go to an aquarium, look up close, this is any pufferfish. They almost have these specks inside their eye that they use to refract the water and to see a bit better. So next time you're at an aquarium, take an up close look at a pufferfish and look at their eyeballs, because they're pretty pretty. They're pretty interesting. All right, the next animal is our sunfish, or commonly also known as the mola mola. It is one of the largest bony fish in the world. Adults can weigh anywhere from 545 pounds to up to 2,200 pounds. They're very blunt, like our pufferfish, so they almost look like a fish without a tail, like it just completely fell off or it didn't develop. They're native to tropic and temperate waters around the world, so they are common all over the place. They are found here, and they are a very flat fish. So it almost looks like their entire main body segment has been squished. They range anywhere from those tropic temperate waters, so you're talking your middle latitudes. The females can produce more eggs than any other invertebrate that we know of. They can produce over 300 million eggs in one hatching. They're generalist predators too, so they were eating small fish, small larvae. They're not super picky on exactly what they're eating. They don't really have too many natural predators. We being one of the main ones, they get caught in gill nets. They suffocate on trash, plastic bags. They get entangled on them. We're really their main predator, and the main decline is the population, but they are eaten by killer whales. Sea lions and sharks have been known to snack on them every once in a while. And they are considered a delicacy in most parts of the world. The European Union has regulations on banning the entire sale of any part of this fish, but they are a delicacy. They can live up to about 10 years, depending on the conditions, where they are, how much they're eating, but 10 years is the longest we've known them to live, and they can be up to 11 feet. They can be as long as they are wide when those two fins are extended completely. Like the pufferfish, they are also very clumsy swimmers because they don't have a normal tail that you would see. So they are born with a slight tail and it never fully develops, which gives them their odd shape. So they almost fly through the water sideways with those two wings flapping. But again, not super agile, very clumsy swimmers. So that back fin is the calvus. It almost acts like a rudder when they're swimming. Doesn't do much. I'll say their main propulsion system is the flapping of their two fins. If you do come in contact with a mola mola, please be very, very careful. Their skin is extremely rough. It's been compared to very rough sandpaper. So when people are handling mola molas with strandings, with entanglements, they have to wear special gloves and long sleeve shirts to protect their skin because it is very abrasive. It's not your typical fish scale that you would assume. It is a very rough skin. With having such rough skin, it is a breeding ground for a parasite. So they tend to have a parasite that grows in and around their skin, and fish will feed off of that parasite and eat it. But to get rid of it, they will actually propel themselves out of the water to splash down and kind of splash the parasite off their skin. Tends to work, tends to not. I don't believe the parasite impedes the fish in any way. It's probably just not nice to have. I mean, no one really wants to have a parasite living on them. But they do have a parasite that lives in their sandpapery skin. Our next fun creature is the lion's mane jellyfish, also known as the Arctic jellyfish, red jellyfish, the hairy jellyfish. They have a very dense tentacle system. They can vary in size, but they do have the capability to being up of 6 feet. But ones that are in their lower latitudes tend to be on the smaller side. The largest one ever recorded was recorded in 1865 off the coast of Massachusetts. It was 7 feet wide, and it had a tentacle range of 120 feet. So that was the longest tentacle that was able to be measured. They do sting. It is a painful sting to humans, so please be careful to not handle these jellyfish and to kind of stay away. It is not as bad as some other stings. I don't believe it is poisonous, but it does hurt quite a bit. And they will use these stinging tentacles to pull in prey. So they will eat zooplankton, sea creatures, smaller jellyfish, whatever they have in range. The juveniles tend to be a lighter orange or tan when they're very young, or they have no color at all when they're very young, So clear, white, nothing. When they're older is when they get that color. So you can kind of gauge how old one of the lion's mane jellyfish is based on the color. Color is not the only indicator, and sometimes different factors do affect that, but the darker in color, typically the older they are. If you look at the middle picture, you can kind of see that there are 8 segments along, and so the jellyfish is divided into 8 lobes, and each of those lobes has 70 to 150 tentacles coming off of each lobe. So in total, you can have up to 1,200 individual stinging tentacles in one jellyfish, and that varies in length, varies in the size of the jellyfish. They tend to be mostly near the surface because that's where their food is, so they eat zooplankton and phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are a photosynthetic algae that need the sun to produce and live and breathe. So that's where the jellyfish tend to live, is where their food source is. And they move like a typical jellyfish would with small pulsations, but they really depend on the ocean's currents to move from one place to another. They're not fast swimmers. They're kind of just going with the flow, going where the ocean takes them. And that's how they mostly eat. We'll find them up here in the summer and autumn times. In the winter, we're not really seeing them. There tends to be a bigger bloom of these jellyfish in June, right at that kind of the turn of the summer. But we do want to be careful of those stinging tentacles. They still can sting sometimes when they have been washed up on the beach. So you want to make sure that you aren't touching the tentacles even after if it has been washed up on the beach. The next animal we have is the horseshoe crab. So these are a prehistoric crab that have been around longer than the dinosaurs. They're over 300 million years old. They're more closely related to scorpions and spiders than they are to actual prehistoric crabs. And their body is divided into 3 segments. So you have the prosoma, which is the first segment, so that's their head, the aposoma, which is the abdomen, and the telson, which is the tail. So the head of the horseshoe crab is what gave it its name. It almost looks like the footprint of a horse. It's that horseshoe. And this is the largest part of the body. It contains all of the important organs. It's got the brain, the heart, the mouth, the nervous system. It's got the glands. Everything is contained in this first segment. It also has its eyes that it uses to see. So they have 9 eyes scattered throughout the body. Some are more light receptors, which are more closer to the tail. They have 2 large compound eyes up at the top. That's useful for finding mates and for food. The difference between a male and a female is when you flip them over, that first leg on the side. So the males will have what looks almost like a boxing glove, which you can see down at the bottom here in the middle. So that boxing glove is actually used to hook onto females during the mating season so they can't run away. So that's how you can kind of tell. And the females will have more of a traditional claw. It will all look the same. The middle section, or the aposoma, is the abdomen. It looks like that triangle with spines on it. Spines are just there to intimidate. They are movable. It's kind of there to protect the gills and other things that are needed for mating. It's really more of a protection, intimidation factor with those. They are not poisonous. And the tail, the telson, which is the third section, it's long, it's pointed, really only used if a horseshoe crab is flipped over. There's really no defense mechanism to it. I mean, it looks intimidating. Of course, it will hurt if you step on it, but it is not poisonous at all. Females tend to be about a third larger than the males, so they can grow up to be 18 to 19 inches long from top to bottom, from head to tail. And the males are typically smaller, ranging from 14 to 15 inches. They can be found all over the world. There are 3 different species of horseshoe crab that live in Asia, the Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. They tend to more feed at night because, they don't really have a predator. They've been around for so long, but they do tend to feed at night, where they'll eat little sea worms or other things on the beach. Mating season happens in late spring and early summer, so they will come up, make a nest, lay their eggs. The males will arrive first and wait for the females to arrive. And then they will lay their eggs. Those eggs are a huge food source for reptiles and shorebirds. So a lot of the horseshoe crabs actually do not make it past the larval stage. When they do hatch, they look like the adult without a tail. They haven't developed their tail yet. And females can deposit up of tens of thousands of eggs in one laying. And they can go through about 16 to 17 molts in their lifetime. They all kind of molt around the same time. So a lot of what washes up onshore is actually a molt. It is not a deceased horseshoe crab. You can tell by the front, if it's cracked open, it is a molt. So they will crack open that front and crawl right out of that old skin. Happens about 16 to 17 times. A lot of times it's the same thing with crabs and lobsters. They just don't have the energy to molt anymore, and they can't push out, and that's a lot of the cause of death of horseshoe crabs. Another big issue with these is actually the harvesting of their blood. They have blue blood that looks like the milk from Star Wars. But this blood is actually used in making vaccines, testing diseases. There are many organizations who do this humanely. The typical process would be you would harvest a horseshoe crab. It's just be like us donating blood. They're marked. They donate some blood. They're put in a holding tank for a few days, fed to make sure that they're back to normal movement and health, and then they're released and they're never harvested again. Some companies don't do that. It's not a very widely regulated organization or business, but that is a big issue, is the over-harvesting. They were over-harvested quite a bit several years ago. There's also habitat loss, which is a big issue, especially during their prime breeding season. Beaches are getting destroyed. We're encroaching on it. There's coastal development. So they're losing their habitat where they can't breed. They can't lay their eggs. So they lose a lot of their juveniles very early on. So I did put a warning on this fish. It is not a bad fish. It is just a very creepy looking fish. So if anyone is a little squeamish, now would be the time to maybe look away. I'm going to warn you, it's not a blobfish, but it is another little creepy fish. So the monkfish, which is a bottom-dwelling slime fish, they have a mucus layer on them instead of like scales. They have a mucus layer. Also known as the all-mouth fish, the American anglerfish, the bellows fish. They can grow up to 55 inches. That's one of your larger ones. They're typically 35 to 40 inches at most. So they're a demersal fish, so they live in the deep ocean water. And they're kind of near the seabed and in the sediment there. The oldest we've ever known one of these fish to live is about 30 years. And they can weigh up to 50 pounds. That's your larger specimens that you're catching. They're an ambush predator, so they wait in the sediment with some sand and some stuff covering them, and then when a prey swims by, they'll attack it and they'll eat it. And that's how they spend most of their time, is just kind of waiting for prey to swim by. They swim very slowly, so they use those pectoral fins, again, to kind of just flutter through the water, and their main back fin is just used as a rudder to kind of determine where they're going. Not very fast, not moving too hard. They are known for having those two little spikes, similar to like an anglerfish. They've got those the spikes that come off their top there. Spawning takes place peak May and June time is where you're really going to get those juveniles. They typically eat squids, cuttlefish. They have been seen to eat shorebirds. They rarely come up to the surface, but occasionally after a large storm has moved through, or if there's something that's been stirring them up, they have been seen to take an entire seagull out of off the water and eat it. So that is also something that's pretty interesting. Their eggs will float, so they don't lay eggs. Their eggs aren't attached to anything. They will float in a clutch in like a mucus veil that will just kind of float through the water column until they hatch, which takes anywhere from 6 to 100 days. And those tiny larvae will feed on zooplankton until they develop into the larger fish as adults. Our next little creature is our sand dollar. There are quite many different species of sand dollars. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about the common sand dollar. So it's also they're a species of flat burrowing urchin. So they are related to a sea urchin. They are very similar. These guys are native to the northern hemisphere. They tend to stay in sandy bottoms anywhere from low tide all the way down to 5,000 feet deep. Their mouth is located on the bottom of their little bodies, and it's in the center, so it's around the radius, which we'll see on the other side. A fun fact about these little guys is that they're supposed to be represented of lost coins of mermaids or people of Atlantis. Some Christian missionaries have found symbolism in the shape of the radial star that comes out of that pattern. Is like dove-shaped, the internal structures, and comparing it to the holes of the wounds of the crucifixion of Jesus and other features like the Star of Bethlehem and Easter lily, a poinsettia, that radial 5-pointed star that we see on these little guys, which you can see here. They're flat and disc-like, tend to be about 3 inches wide in diameter. When they're alive, they're a purplish brown color, and they're very velvety. So they have a bunch of little spines. They're not sharp and they're not poisonous, but they have a velvety texture, and they're almost like these little spines. And these spines, they actually coordinate to move. So these guys will burrow, they will move across the sandy bottom, and that's how you know if they're alive or not. So if they have that purplish dark color, please leave them where they are. They are living. You can move them into the water, but if you find one that's that color on the beach, he's not coming home with you because he is still living. If they are that white, chalky color that you would find in a shell, he has passed. So you want to make sure you're not taking a live one home. If it's moving, it's alive. So they can coordinate those to move across the floor, to get to food. And you can see that hole in the middle there, that is its mouth, and that's what it uses to eat the food. So they're eating phytoplankton, they're eating small microscopic benthic organisms that are on the floor. So you're eating copepods, plankton, diatoms, algae, kelp, and other detritus there on the ocean floor. The light bulb tunicate is a marine invertebrate known as a tunicate. So they are a species of sea squirt, which are these tiny little filter feeders that you'll find on the dock. What's really cool about these guys is if you can actually pull them out of the water and squish them, and they'll squirt water, and that's why they're called sea squirts. So they are a filter feeder. So they feed and they filter the water through their siphons. And they have these 2 siphons. So one's an inhalant siphon, one's an exhalant siphon. They inhale the water, they filter out what they want and spit out whatever they don't want. They do this through respiration. It's almost like they're breathing, but it's their feeding. So the adults are sessile, meaning they're not moving, but the larvae will actually move. It almost looks like a tiny larval fish. You can see them in the seawater floating through the water column. Once they kind of get out of the larval stage, they'll find a place where they want to make a home. They'll become a sessile being, and they'll be there either until they die or they get pulled off. They are a biofouling species, so we tend to think that they are not good. They are on the bottom of the boats, on bottoms of docks, so they cause a lot of issues. There are over 3,000 different species of tunicate in the world, so that we're only talking about one. But we've got 3,000 across the entire world, not to mention just in the United States. You're going to find these guys in shallow water. They are a colonial being, so you'll see them grouped together. You're never going to see just a singular organism. They tend to be in a group. They all tend to have almost like a root structure that connects them together. But they're native to Europe and Norway and in the Mediterranean Sea. They were first introduced into the United States in Long Island Sound near Connecticut in 2009. Most of the invasive species like this have been known to come through on ballast water or on the bottom of tankers, different ocean-going vessels that travel from one place to another. So the larvae will be sucked into the ballast water system on a ship. When a ship expels that water, because either it doesn't need it anymore, it needs to repurpose, rebalance, it'll just expel whatever is in that tank. And if a larvae is in that tank and it's not treated, we get our invasive species. So they are suspension feeders, similar to a sea cucumber. They're sucking in that water, they're pulling out whatever they want in the water column, and then spitting out whatever they don't want. Though the larval stage does not eat. They don't eat until they become a sessile being. Now, our next little friend is quite famous. That perfect little white little seal at the bottom is your typical, what many people would think of a seal. So we have harp seals. They are a true seal. They are a pinniped, which means they don't have ears. They have internal ears. They don't have ear flaps like a sea lion. So you're not seeing any ear structure like we would. They're also known as saddleback seals or Greenland seals because their coloration as adults does look like they have a saddle on their back. They're carnivores, typically living about 20 years, and they live in a colony. They're not a singular being. They like to be social and live with other seals. They range from about 5 to 6 feet in length, but could be up to 400 pounds. So males, they're dimorphic, which means your males are larger than your females. Your males are going to be more decorated. They're going to be the ones who are fighting for their mates. They do spend some time on land, but very little. They really like that cold North Atlantic, Arctic water to live in. They can remain submerged for up to 15 minutes and can do about 8 dives in an hour that can range from less than 20 meters all the way up to 500 meters. And they do that about 8 times in an hour for maybe 15 minutes at a time. They return to the same breeding grounds in Newfoundland and Greenland, and in that White Sea and the Greenland Sea. And the males will fight other males for their mates to get the females. When the young are born, they're all that wonderful fluffy color, but they will lose that about 2 weeks after they're born when they do their first molt. And that's where you get that coloration. So you have your harp seal has that saddle on that back right there. They're fluffy. They have really fluffy fur, and it is very highly valued in that area. They are one of the most commercially important seals that is still hunted to this day. It's estimated tens of thousands are killed yearly for their blubber, for their meat. They do a really cool thing with their body. They combine both anatomical and behavioral approaches to managing their body heat. So they can get hot and they can get cold. Their main body segment from their head to their tail is covered in blubber. Everything but their flippers has no blubber, or just their flippers have no blubber. So that's how they use to regulate their body heat. They release heat through their flippers and keep their heat in their blubber, kind of as needed. If they need to stay warm, they'll tuck their fins closer. If they need to expel some body heat, they'll extend their flippers and release some body heat. Our next little friend is super cute. You'll see his head in just a little second. So this is our lumpfish. So they live in the sea of all the way up to about 2,800 feet deep. Maximum size in males is 20 inches, and females can range 22 to 24 inches. They can weigh up to 21 pounds, but they tend to be on the much smaller side. They eat invertebrates like jellyfish, small fish, crustaceans, and polychaetes. They are very chunky, and they have a very stout body. So they're not fast swimmers, they're kind of clumsy, wobbling through, and they have a very large set of eyeballs to kind of watch out for predators because they're not a fast-moving fish. They like to cling to rocks with a modified fin on the bottom that allows them to stick to things. They don't have scales. They have a skin, and they don't have your typical dorsal fin that most fish would have. I like to call it a meaty mohawk. It's a set of bones underneath there that gives them that lumpy structure that you see, and that's why they're called lumpfish. So that thick layer of skin covers, it's a protection mechanism because they do have a thick skin. So that pelvic fin allows them to stick. They will change color over their lifetime. Typically, you're going to see them in that nice aquamarine blue color. They can be gray, like in the top left. It depends on where they are, what they're eating, what their life is like in that area. Young lumpfish will cling to seaweed in shallow waters near the shore, and then they'll kind of move further into deeper, colder waters as they get older. They're singular fish in the cold water. They kind of just like doing their own thing, hanging out by themselves. But they are near threatened because a lot of overfishing is happening. So the males are considered a delicacy in many countries. But the female caviar, their eggs that the females lay, is called roe, is also sold as caviar. It's very expensive, and it's a delicacy. Now, they do have a really good use for humans. A lot of salmon farmers will actually put them in their salmon tanks to get rid of sea lice. Sea lice are like a tiny, like shrimp parasite that is found in a lot of salmon farming. And lumpfish are one of the only fish that actually eats it and enjoys eating it. So farmers will put them in and around the salmon to eat the lice and kind of clean up the tank. But you know, when you have more fish, you have a lot of fish eating, you got more fish poop, so you kind of got to balance that out. But it's allowed for salmon to kind of be sustainable in a way, and it's also allowed it for it to have a better production of the quality of salmon because it's not being infested by a parasite of sea lice. They are also on a currency. So in Iceland, the lumpfish is on the krona, which is about 80 cents in US currency, but the coin features a lumpfish on one side. Our next little friend is our seahorse. There are lots of different species of seahorse. We're specifically going to be talking about the northern seahorse or the spotted seahorse. So they're a diurnal species, approximately 15 centimeters in length, with a lifespan about 1 to 4 years. Again, depending on the conditions, depending on where they are in life. Your captive ones are going to live a bit longer. Your natural ones may live a bit shorter. They have a bunch of different colors. They come in grays, blacks, reds, greens, oranges. So they're a very colorful species. Mainly feed on small crustaceans and brine shrimp, but it has been noted that captive male seahorses will actually eat their fry, which is their juvenile, like the baby seahorses. They're another ambush predator. So what they will do is they'll actually suck in water at their snout, and that's how they'll get the prey that is swimming by. Their eyes move independently like a chameleon, so that's why they're situated on the sides of their head so they can kind of move them all around, kind of get a sense of what's going on in their surroundings. Males are larger, more decorated, have longer tails, and they are monogamous. So they will mate for life with the same seahorse that they have, and they will perform ritual dances every morning to their mate to kind of rejuvenate their link and their bond. If one of the seahorses is to pass away, they won't find a mate right away. They go through almost like a grieving period in between the two happening, which I think is very interesting. They're not just moving right on to the next, they kind of wait. It can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. Some have been noted to wait months. Some have been noted to not take another mate at all. Like all other seahorses, the northern seahorse males are the caregiver. So the females will deposit the eggs into a pouch in the male, and he will actually give birth to live seahorses. And they come out really tiny and they're really cute. It takes about 20 to 21 days for this to happen. Pretty short incubation period. And then you've got about anywhere from 80 to a couple hundred tiny seahorses. They like coastal habitats, but their habitat is diminishing with coastal development, climate change, so we do see a decreasing population here of our seahorses. And our last little friend, our 13th creature for Hanukkah, is a sea potato, also known as the oyster thief or the bladder weed. Called the oyster thief, they are a hollow floating seaweed that when it inflates has been known to take entire oyster beds with it. So in Europe, a man saw an oyster bed floating away, and it was because of these oyster thieves. They range in size anywhere from a few inches to the size of a soccer ball. So this is an invasive species here. It was found originally in France in 1906 was when it first discovered, or in Europe in 1906. It was discovered here in 2011 on the Atlantic coast. It was ranging in North Carolina and has slowly made its way up, and it is now found here. We're still tracking its movement because it is still actively invading our coast. So there are reporting methods to reporting if you do see this sea potato, but it does look very similar to our native, the sea cauliflower, which is a similar bladder-looking seaweed that we have here. They're hollow on the inside. They tend to be olive brown to green. They wash up on the shore. They like the tide pools and the rocky areas. You're not going to find them out in the middle of the ocean or in a kelp bed. You're going to find them more on the rocky shore with rockweed, bladderwrack, and other seaweeds that have a holdfast, that have a situated area. So they tend to be confused with the sea cauliflower, which is our native species we have here. But they are taking up space. They're taking up food. They are very highly competitive. They come in fast. And they've kind of just taken over our coast, which is causing a lot of issues for our native seaweeds and for other issues for other animals, because no one eats these. We don't eat them. Animals won't eat it. So it's kind of just taken over, and there is no mitigation system for it right now. So we're just kind of monitoring the movement of it and how much we have and where it's going. But those are our 12 sea creatures. Are there any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone.
Hi, Megan. Thank you so much. That was an interesting tour of some familiar and some very unfamiliar sea organisms. I'm wondering, how many of these did you encounter during summer camp? And did the kids have a favorite or one they thought was the most gross? Or
we caught one monkfish in our lobster pot, which was the first time I had ever encountered a monkfish. It was slimy. It was gross. The kids did not like it. It bit my finger. So we threw him right back. I've only ever seen one sand dollar in my entire life. I've come to the Cape my entire life, and I have seen one sand dollar. I live here now. One sand dollar that I've ever seen. Lumpfish tend to be in the deeper water, so I haven't really encountered them because I'm not off the coast too much. But it was interesting to see a monkfish for the first time. Not a pretty creature. And we didn't expect to find it in Lewis Bay, because Lewis Bay ranges from maybe 6 to 12 feet, so you're not getting super deep, and those guys really like that deep, cold water. So it was really interesting to see him this far in.
Interesting. And in terms of lumpfish, you said they actually don't have scales.
Yes.
Are there other fish around Cape Cod that are scaleless?
So yeah, so we do have actually a lot of fish here. The spiny dogfish, which is more of a shark, is actually doesn't really have like a scaled system. So there are more fish than you would actually think that do have more of a leathery texture skin than overlapping scales.
Interesting. I never knew there was such a thing. Another question, when you're talking about the tunicates, and mentioning that they're not native, are they at this point out competing other native organisms like sea cucumbers?
Yes, so a lot of our sea squirts, since their larva is a free-floating organism, so it gets sucked into that ballast water and is brought over, and then it becomes a sessile being, so it's taking up space, it's taking up nutrients that other filter feeders would need. So those invasives, and there's nothing that eats them, there's nothing that kills them besides us removing them. So there is no mitigation system, because once they release those larvae into the water, you can't, they're microscopic and you can't filter the entire ocean. So they're really starting to outcompete our native species. We're seeing a huge decline in them because they don't have the space. They can't compete because these guys have just come in and like, this is perfect. We don't care the conditions. We don't care whatever water is happening. We'll thrive and just live. And our native species just cannot keep up with the invasive species we have.
Interesting. I'm wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about how you decided to come to a college that was focused on the marine world, and how your career seems to be going into the marine world realm as well. But was this something that you were interested in from the time you were a little kid, or how did that develop for you?
I've been coming to the Cape since I was 6 months old. Grandparents met in Cuttyhonk. I've done family summers up here, walking the beach at low tide with my mom and my grandmother, which is where I really found my love for it. And then I was kind of in high school going, well, what do I want to do with my life? You know, what do I like? What's interesting to me? And I had found that I could do marine biology, and I had toured SUNY Maritime, and I was kind of like, I don't know if I really want to go to a maritime academy. Don't really know if that's for me. And then the summer of my junior year, we were sitting at the Otis Rotary in Bourne in traffic, bumper to bumper, typical Cape traffic. And my dad sees the sign for Mass Maritime and goes, why don't we go get a tour? Let's go see what's going on at Mass Maritime. I was like, I don't want to. I didn't like SUNY. There's no way that I'm going to like another maritime academy. It was the middle of their orientation program. So it's a paramilitary school. So we wear a uniform. We're in a regiment. So we have a 2-week boot camp, an orientation program, which is, you're marching, you're doing push-ups, you're reading out of a tiny book. So your typical military boot camp. That's when I took a tour. Was in the middle of that and absolutely fell in love. And then I was like, this is it. I want nowhere else. I'm not going anywhere else. This is where I want to go. There was maybe some decision and some talking about maybe another school, but I was like, this is where I'm going to go. And I graduated in June with a Bachelor's of Science. I found the Maritime Museum as an internship last summer as the assistant camp director. And then I got an email from Liz in March saying that the program director had opened and that she had asked me to apply. And I was like, I don't know, I am 22. I still have to get through school. But we were able to work out me finishing up my degree, and I started training the day after graduation. So I got my diploma, got in the car, and went, okay, here I'm emailing all of the staff that I need to train. Here are all my plans that I have to do. And we had a fantastic summer. And so I am glad to be up here. I stumbled into maritime. I stumbled into the Maritime Academy, but I always knew marine biology was a passion.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm not sure I've ever heard a story from someone who found their college by sitting in traffic.
And it was an aha moment. I was really lucky to have an aha moment walking onto campus going, nope, this is it. Don't sell me anything else.
That's wonderful. And I should point out too that, of course, the summer of 2021, was the first summer for the Young Mariner program.
Yes.
In its second year, this past summer, we had twice as many kids as we had.
Twice as many kids. We ran an afternoon session. We did more outreach with local libraries and some local school districts and our yacht clubs. So we grew, and we're continuing to grow.
So, I see here, something in the chat from Elizabeth York from our boss saying, "We are so lucky to have you, Meghan."
And I think she's raising her hand too.
Points. So, but I certainly know that when I'm working on different kinds of things around the office, that if I have any kind of marine science question, you have the answer.
The resident marine biologist.
Yes. So fantastic. Alrighty. So as we are in the holiday season, there are a couple special opportunities I think folks have. So one is to consider giving your loved ones membership to the museum. And really, if they come a couple times a year, that is probably going to pay for itself. So I think that makes a really special holiday gift. I think it's even better if you plan to go along with your gift recipient and make it a day. So, and the other thing to consider if you're a grandparent is, we don't have it up and running quite yet, but by the time we get into about the middle of the spring, consider buying a spot for your grandchild or a child or neighbor's kid or whatever to the Young Mariner program. It's really intended to be a way for kids who've maybe never had a chance to be out on the water, to get out on the water, to learn hands-on, and it's always so interesting to me to see when they come back, when they come off the boat and they're all excited about something. It really is a fantastic experience, I think. So that's another thing to keep in mind for gift giving season. So someone writes in, I think I know what her first favorite rescue creature was. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, my favorite sea creature, after doing research for this and kind of diving in and figuring out what species we had here, my favorite one was a sand dollar. I've never really seen them here. Then I found out, they were mermaids, like mermaid coins, and I was like, that is so cool. And then all of the history behind the symbolism and the shape and how they grow and the fact that they can move and crawl around, and that was my favorite. I think what my dad is talking about.
Yes, it is from your dad.
My favorite rescue creature, I'm not, I think I know what he's asking, but I'm not entirely sure.
They're typing
the horseshoe crab. So I have been known to run down to the beach at low tide, and I actually dug up a horseshoe crab that had been flipped on his back and had been kind of engulfed in sand. And it happened several times. I like to save a bunch of stranded animals, fish that jump in. But this horseshoe crab, he was probably the size of a dinner plate, quite large. And he had been kind of stuck. And I was able to dig him out and throw him back on vacation. But we do actually at the museum, we've got a bunch of more. We have a touch tank. We have two. We have a 20-gallon and a 10-gallon touch tank. Our 10-gallon is home to all of our predators. So those are the things that are eating our small little guys. So we have a spider crab named Jessica. We thought Jessica was originally Jake, and then she flipped over and we went, "Oh, you are Jessica." So she is Jessica from State Farm, or Flo from Progressive, depending on who you ask. So she's in that tank. We also have a tiny juvenile blue crab and a channeled whelk named Coco. We've got some banded killifish, some sheep's head minnows. We have a flat-clawed hermit crab, some tiny little hermit crabs. other little fish, Asian shore crabs, and they're all at kid level, so you guys can come in. We can take out all the animals, all the spider crabs. We can take out Cheez-It, who's our favorite little spider crab. He's got a little orange sponge on his back. So we call him Cheez-It because he's cute and tiny. And we can take him out. We love to show the kids everything that is in those tanks. Was caught by our kids at the Young Mariner program in our 3 lobster pots that we had out in Lewis Bay over the summer, or they were caught recently. We took a trip, Liz and I, to Veterans Beach with some nets and went up the creek there and got some of the fish. But everything has been caught by kids. They love to bring whatever we get in those lobster pots. If we can fit it in the tank, we'll bring it home. They'll name it, they'll feed it, and they love it for the week. And then they come back and they're like, well, how's this one? We've had a few crabs in our repertoire. We had a blue crab. We had 2 blue crabs, Leonardo da Vinci and Marco Crabbo, for a few months. They got too big, had to go home. We had Cakes, who was our single clawed crab, quite vicious, the meanest blue crab I think we've ever had. You walked into the room and he went, no, get out. This is my tank. And then we had a little, with Cakes, we had a little Asian shore crab named Ragoon. But we had to let them go. They got too big. So they do molt and they get bigger, and then our tank isn't big enough, so we send them on their way. We send them home. But everything in there is native to Lewis Bay, native to our waters. It's a saltwater tank, and I pull the water out of the harbor, filter it a little bit, feed them every once in a while, and they all have cute little names.
And it's a wonderful opportunity. I think it's interesting, too, that there are as many adults as kids who are really fascinated. If you point out particular things in the tank to them, it's as engrossing for adults, I think, as it is for kids. So
everyone finds something different. They all look at and they always point out something that maybe someone else didn't see, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a wonderful educational opportunity. So right there in our class.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So just a couple notes for everyone who's watching. Our next lecture in the new year is going to be on Sunday, January 8th. Dr. Roger Hanlon from the Marine Biological Laboratory is going to be talking about cephalopods. So he does work trying to understand how the brains and skin of octopi and squid change, and how what we learn from those creatures might be used for human applications. So I think that's going to be something to really look forward to. So again, that is on January 8th. And between now and then, we want to wish you the very happiest holiday season. No matter which holiday you might be celebrating, we hope that it's a wonderful time for you with family and friends, thinking about the things that really matter the most in life. So again, a very happy holiday. And we will see you all in the new year. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Merry Christmas and happy holidays, everyone.